When the customs officer pulled the small bag of white powder from my purse, my daughter-in-law Melanie winked at me and whispered, "Don't worry, Eleanor. A room at Riverside Care Home is waiting for you." I didn't panic. I simply requested one phone call to the only person who could help my son see the real devil hiding in that expensive dress. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from." The fluorescent lights above the security checkpoint buzzed with an intensity that matched my racing thoughts. Officer Garrett held up the plastic bag, examining it with practiced scrutiny. 23 years on the bench as Judge Eleanor Barnes had taught me to read faces, and his expression told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't routine. This was deliberate. "Ma'am, can you explain what this is?" His voice carried that professional neutrality law enforcement uses when they think they've cornered someone. I glanced at Melanie, who stood 15 feet away at the departure gate. Her face had gone pale, but there was something else there, something I recognized from years of watching guilty parties in my courtroom. Relief mixed with satisfaction. She'd expected this moment, planned for it, even. "I have no idea what that is, officer," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I've never seen it before in my life." Melanie rushed over, her designer heels clicking against the airport tile. "Oh my God, Eleanor, what's happening?" Her performance was almost convincing, almost. But I'd watched too many liars try to sell their stories to a judge. The irony wasn't lost on me. They didn't call me the Steel Judge for nothing. 3 hours earlier, I'd been sitting in my modest apartment, carefully packing for what Melanie had described as a family bonding trip to Hawaii. She'd insisted on picking me up, insisted on helping me pack, insisted on carrying my purse while I used the restroom. Every insistence now made perfect sense. "Your mother-in-law is being detained for possession of what appears to be cocaine," Officer Garrett explained, sealing the bag in an evidence pouch. "Ma'am, you're going to need to come with me." As they led me toward the security office, I caught Melanie's eye. For just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw satisfaction there. Victory. She thought she'd won whatever game she'd been playing with me for the past 3 years. What she didn't know was that I'd been keeping detailed notes about her suspicious behavior for 6 months. My old habit of documenting everything a vestige from my years on the bench had never really left me, and it was about to become Melanie's worst nightmare. The interrogation room was smaller than the ones I'd seen attorneys use with their clients. Cinder block walls painted institutional beige, a metal table bolted to the floor, and that particular smell of industrial disinfectant that never quite covers the scent of fear and desperation. "Mrs. Barnes," Officer Garrett began, settling into the chair across from me. "This is a serious situation. We found approximately 2 grams of what field tests indicate is cocaine in your personal bag. Do you understand the charges you're facing?" I folded my hands on the table, the same way I used to when listening to particularly ridiculous arguments from defense attorneys. "Officer Garrett, I understand the law better than most. I also understand my rights. I'd like to make my phone call now." He studied my face, probably looking for the signs of guilt or panic he was used to seeing. Instead, he found the same composed expression that had intimidated lawyers for over 2 decades. I'd perfected this look during my first year on the bench, when young attorneys thought they could bulldoze a female judge with aggressive posturing. "You seem awfully calm for someone facing felony drug charges," he observed. "I'm 65 years old, officer. I've seen enough in my lifetime to know that panic never solved anything." I leaned back slightly. "My phone call, please." The truth was, I felt anything but calm. Beneath my composed exterior, my mind was racing, analyzing every detail of the past few weeks, Melanie's sudden interest in spending time with me, her insistence that we needed to start fresh as a family, the way she'd offered to handle all the travel arrangements. I'd been suspicious of her motives from the beginning. After 3 years of subtle hostility and not so subtle attempts to push me out of my son William's life, her sudden warmth had felt manufactured. But even I hadn't imagined she'd go this far. 20 minutes later, I was escorted to a payphone that looked like it belonged in a museum. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years, not since my retirement party. Thompson Legal, came the familiar voice. Michael, it's Eleanor Barnes, Judge Barnes. The surprise in Michael's voice was genuine. He'd been my court clerk for 15 years before going to law school. Now he ran one of the most successful criminal defense practices in the state. Eleanor, what's wrong? I need you at LAX Airport Security, Terminal 2. I've been arrested for drug possession. Silence. Then a low whistle. Judge, with all due respect, that's the last thing I expected to hear from you. Are you serious? Deadly serious. And Michael, bring everything you can find on Melanie Wright Barnes. Maiden name Wright. I have a feeling this isn't as random as it appears. Jesus, Eleanor, what has that woman done now? Michael's voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many domestic cases gone wrong. I'll be there in 40 minutes. Don't say another word to anyone. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced since retiring from the bench, the familiar thrill of a complex case unfolding, the satisfaction of seeing through someone's lies to the truth beneath. Melanie thought she was dealing with a helpless old woman, a retired judge living on a pension, dependent on her son's family for social interaction, someone who could be easily discredited and pushed aside. She had no idea she'd just picked a fight with someone who'd spent 23 years dismantling carefully constructed deceptions. Michael arrived exactly 42 minutes after my call, wearing the same worried expression he'd worn during our most difficult cases. Through the small window in the holding room door, I watched him flash his credentials and speak in low, urgent tones with Officer Garrett. When they finally brought me out, Michael's first words weren't what I expected. Eleanor, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? His voice carried genuine concern, but underneath it was something else. Familiarity. He knew me well enough to understand that if I was here, there was more to the story. I've been set up, I said simply as we settled into a private consultation room. By my daughter-in-law. Michael opened his briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. His movements automatic after years of practice. Start from the beginning. Everything. I told him about Melanie's sudden change in behavior, the insistence on this trip, her handling of my luggage. As I spoke, I watched his expression shift from skepticism to recognition. He'd seen cases like this before. Melanie Wright Barnes, he said, consulting notes he'd apparently made during his drive over. 34 years old, married to your son, William, for 3 years. No prior criminal record, but that doesn't mean much these days. What else did you find? Michael's expression darkened. She's been busy, Eleanor, very busy. I made some calls while driving over here. Melanie's been asking questions about you around town, your health, your finances, your daily routine. She even visited Dr. Phillips last month, claiming she was concerned about your mental state. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dr. Phillips had been my physician for 15 years. The idea that Melanie had gone to him, planted seeds of doubt about my competency, felt like a violation beyond what she'd already done. She's been building a case, I said, understanding flooding through me. This isn't just about getting me arrested. This is about proving I'm unfit, unstable. She wants me declared incompetent. That's what I'm thinking, too. Michael leaned forward, his voice dropping. Eleanor, there's something else. I ran a background check on her maiden name. Melanie Wright has a history you need to know about. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents I recognized from my years on the bench: court records, police reports, restraining orders. She was married before William, Michael continued. Twice, actually. Both marriages ended badly. The first husband, Thomas Reynolds, committed suicide after Melanie systematically destroyed his reputation and career. The police suspected foul play, but couldn't prove anything. My hands went cold as I read through the documents. The pattern was becoming clear. The second husband, Gregory Wilson, disappeared entirely after their divorce, left town, changed his name, the works. But before he vanished, he filed a police report claiming Melanie had planted drugs in his car and called in an anonymous tip. I looked up from the papers, meeting Michael's gaze. She's done this before, more than once. And Eleanor, there's something about the timing that bothers me. William's been talking about updating his will lately. Melanie's been pushing him to include provisions for your care, claiming you're becoming forgetful and need supervision. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Melanie hadn't just decided to destroy me on a whim. This was a calculated long-term plan to remove me from William's life while positioning herself as the caring daughter-in-law who'd tried to help. If I'm convicted of drug possession, I said slowly, especially at my age, it supports her narrative that I'm losing my mental faculties. William would feel he had no choice but to have me institutionalized. And she'd be there to help him make those difficult decisions about your care, Michael finished. Very convenient for someone who's been systematically isolating you from your son. I thought about the past 3 years, seeing them now through this new lens, the gradual reduction in invitations to family events, the way Melanie would interrupt conversations between William and me, redirecting his attention, the subtle comments about my age, my living situation, my ability to care for myself. She's been playing a very long game, I said. The question is, how do we prove it? Michael tapped his pen against the legal pad. The evidence against you is pretty damning. 2 grams of cocaine in your personal bag. No witnesses to corroborate your story about her planting it. But we have her history, I pointed out. 2 previous marriages with similar allegations. Allegations that were never proven. And Eleanor, I have to be honest with you. Even with this background information, it's going to be an uphill battle. You're 65 years old, traveling alone, and they found drugs in your possession. A jury might find it easier to believe you've developed a drug problem than to accept an elaborate frame-up conspiracy. The weight of my situation was starting to settle in. Melanie had chosen her method carefully. Drug possession by an elderly person would be shocking enough to overshadow any claims of being framed. It would make me look desperate, delusional, exactly the kind of person who needed to be managed by caring family members. There has to be something, I said, my voice harder than I'd intended. Melanie made mistakes. She always does. People like her always think they're smarter than everyone else, but they leave traces. Michael studied my face. What are you thinking? I'm thinking like a judge again. And I leaned back in the chair, feeling my mind shift into the analytical mode that had served me for over 2 decades. Melanie needed access to drugs to plant in my bag. She needed knowledge of airport security procedures to know exactly where and when to act. And she needed to ensure I'd be caught at the right moment. Go on. She's not a career criminal, Michael. She's an amateur who's gotten lucky twice before. But this time, she's dealing with someone who spent 23 years watching people lie under oath. I pulled out my phone, grateful that they'd returned my personal effects during the consultation. I need you to contact Detective Olivia Rodriguez at LAPD. Tell her Judge Eleanor Barnes needs to speak with her about a case that might be connected to 2 previous incidents in her jurisdiction. Michael raised an eyebrow. Olivia Rodriguez. She appeared in your courtroom several times over the years, domestic violence cases mostly. She's thorough, and she doesn't like people who prey on family members. I met his gaze. And, Michael, tell her I think we're looking at someone who's done this before and plans to do it again. As Michael made notes, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my retirement, the familiar surge of purpose that came with seeking justice. Melanie thought she'd neutralized me, turned me into a helpless victim who could be easily discredited. She had no idea that she'd just awakened the same instincts that had made me one of the most respected judges in the state. The consultation room door opened, and Officer Garrett appeared. "Mrs. Barnes, we're ready to process your release on bail." I looked at Michael, who nodded. "I've arranged everything. You'll be released on your own recognizance, but you can't leave the state." As we gathered our things, I felt Melanie's shadow over everything. She was probably at home right now, playing the role of the concerned daughter-in-law, telling William how worried she was about me, how she'd seen signs of instability that she should have recognized sooner. But Melanie had made one crucial error in her planning. She'd assumed that a retired judge would be as helpless as her previous victims. She was about to learn otherwise. Detective Olivia Rodriguez met me at a small diner in downtown LA, far from the courthouse where we'd first crossed paths. She looked older than I remembered her dark hair now streaked with premature gray, but her eyes held the same sharp intelligence that had impressed me during her testimony years ago. "Judge Barnes," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Michael Thompson filled me in on your situation. I have to say, this is the last place I expected to see you. Please, call me Eleanor. I'm not a judge anymore." I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, grateful for the warmth. Though I suspect I'm going to need those instincts again. Olivia pulled out a worn notebook, the kind detectives always carried. "Tell me about Melanie Wright. Everything you can remember, no matter how small." For the next hour, I walked her through years of subtle manipulation, the way Melanie had gradually inserted herself between William and me, how family gatherings became smaller and less frequent, the comments about my age, my living situation, my supposed confusion about modern technology. She's been very careful, I concluded. Nothing overt enough to seem malicious to William, but consistent enough to plant doubts about my competency. Olivia had been taking notes steadily. "You mentioned she visited your doctor." "Dr. Phillips confirmed it yesterday when Michael called. She told him she was concerned about my memory, asked if there were signs of dementia he might have missed. She even suggested I might be self-medicating for anxiety." "Setting up the drug narrative." Olivia nodded. "Smart. If you're caught with cocaine, it supports her story that you've been struggling with substances." The calculation behind it all still took my breath away. She planned this for months, didn't she? At least, Olivia flipped to a new page in her notebook. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. I was the lead detective on Thomas Reynolds' suicide case." I felt a chill run down my spine. Thomas Reynolds, Melanie's first husband. Yes, I never believed it was a simple suicide. Thomas was a successful accountant, well-liked, no history of depression. Then he married Melanie, and within a year, he lost his job, his friends, his family support. He was found with pills and alcohol in his system, along with a suicide note that never quite rang true to me. "You suspected Melanie was involved." "I did, but I couldn't prove it. The evidence was circumstantial at best, but I kept the file open, kept digging. When the report came in about Gregory Wilson, her second husband, claiming she'd planted drugs in his car, I saw the pattern. By then, Gregory had already disappeared, changed his name, moved across the country. And now she's trying the same thing with me." Olivia leaned forward, her expression serious. "Eleanor, Both of these men told me something that should worry you. Melanie doesn't just want to discredit her victims, she wants to control them completely. The drug planting isn't the end goal, it's the beginning. What do you mean? Think about it. If you're convicted, William will feel responsible for your care. Melanie becomes the devoted daughter-in-law who stands by her troubled mother-in-law, helps manage your affairs, makes decisions about your treatment. She gains power over both of you. The full scope of Melanie's plan was becoming clear, and it was more disturbing than I'd imagined. She wants to institutionalize me, then control William through guilt and manipulation. Exactly, and with your background as a judge, discrediting you publicly serves a double purpose. It makes her look like the victim of an unstable family member while positioning her as the reasonable voice in difficult decisions. I stared into my coffee, processing this information. Olivia, we need to prove she planted those drugs, but I don't see how. There were no witnesses, no security cameras in the bathroom where she had access to my bag. There might be more evidence than you think. Olivia smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. I've been working on this for 36 hours straight, and I found something interesting. She pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. This is from the airport security footage taken about 20 minutes before your arrest. Do you recognize the woman in the background? I squinted at the image. A woman with blonde hair was talking to someone just out of frame, but her face wasn't clearly visible. I can't make out her features. That's because she's deliberately positioned herself to avoid the cameras. But look at what she's carrying. Olivia zoomed in on the image. The woman was holding a small cosmetic bag identical to one I'd seen in Melanie's purse countless times. It's the same bag she uses for her makeup, I said, excitement building. But Olivia, this still doesn't prove anything definitive. Maybe not by itself, but I found something else. She swiped to another photo. This is Melanie's credit card statement from 2 weeks ago. Michael got it through a contact at her bank. I studied the list of charges. Most were routine groceries, gas, department stores, but one entry stood out. Hillcrest Pharmaceutical Supply. I read aloud. What is that? It's a medical supply company that sells primarily to hospitals and clinics. They also sell certain controlled substances to licensed facilities. Olivia's expression was grim. I called them this morning. Someone matching Melanie's description purchased a small quantity of pharmaceutical-grade cocaine hydrochloride, claiming it was for a dental office. My heart rate quickened. That's it. That's our evidence. It's circumstantial, but it's a start. The problem is proving she used it to frame you specifically. Olivia closed her notebook. Eleanor, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you prepared for what this investigation might reveal about your son? The question caught me off guard. What do you mean? I mean, William might know more about Melanie's behavior than he's let on. He might have chosen to believe her version of events because it's easier than confronting the truth about his wife. I thought about my son, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died. William had always been gentle, trusting, perhaps too willing to see the best in people, but he was also intelligent and ambitious now, a successful attorney running for city council. Had he really not noticed his wife's systematic campaign against me? Or had I been too harsh, too demanding as a mother, making it easy for him to believe I was the problem? I don't think William knows, I said finally. But I think he's been willfully blind to things he should have questioned. Our relationship, it's complicated. I pushed him hard growing up. Excellence was expected, not praised. After his father died, I became even more demanding. Part of me wonders if he's unconsciously getting back at me through this relationship. That's often how these situations work. The manipulator creates a reality where questioning them feels like betrayal. Olivia gathered her things. Eleanor, I want you to know what you're up against. If we pursue this investigation and we're right about Melanie, it's going to destroy your son's marriage. He'll have to choose between believing his wife is a manipulative criminal or believing his mother is a drug addict in denial. The weight of that choice settled on my shoulders. Part of me wanted to tell Olivia to stop, to let me plead guilty to a reduced charge and disappear quietly from William's life. At least then he could maintain his illusions about his marriage. But then I thought about Thomas Reynolds, driven to suicide. About Gregory Wilson, so traumatized by his experience with Melanie that he changed his identity. About the next victim Melanie would inevitably find once she was finished with my family. We continue the investigation, I said firmly. Whatever the cost. Olivia nodded approvingly. Good, because I have a plan, but it's going to require you to do something that might feel uncomfortable. What kind of plan? We're going to give Melanie exactly what she wants. We're going to let her think she's winning while we document every move she makes. Olivia leaned closer. Eleanor, how do you feel about wearing a wire? The tiny recording device felt foreign against my skin, taped just below my collarbone, where Melanie wouldn't think to look. Olivia had spent an hour that morning teaching me how to activate it discreetly, how to guide conversations toward admissions, how to stay calm when I wanted to scream. Remember, she'd said as we tested the equipment one final time, Melanie thinks she's won. She'll be confident, maybe even gloating. That's when people make mistakes. Now, I stood outside William's house, the same house I'd helped him buy 8 years ago, gathering courage for what might be the most important performance of my life. The recording device was activated. Olivia and Michael were listening from a van 2 blocks away, and my son had no idea his mother was about to prove his wife was a criminal. Melanie answered the door wearing the expression I'd come to recognize as her concerned family member face. Slight frown, worried eyes, voice pitched just low enough to suggest tragedy. Eleanor, she said, stepping aside to let me in. William's not here right now. He had to run to the office for a few hours. But I'm so glad you came by. We need to talk. Yes, I said, following her into the living room. I think we do. She gestured for me to sit on the couch while she took the chair across from me, positioning herself slightly higher. A subtle power play I'd seen in my courtroom countless times. The afternoon light filtered through the windows I'd helped William pick out, casting shadows across furniture I'd helped him choose. Eleanor, I have to be honest with you. William and I are very worried. Melanie leaned forward, her voice taking on that caring tone she'd perfected. This drug situation at the airport, it's not the first sign we've noticed. I kept my expression neutral. What do you mean? The forgetfulness, the confusion about simple things, the way you've been isolating yourself. She shook her head sadly. We should have intervened sooner, but we didn't want to embarrass you. The audacity of it took my breath away. She was sitting in my son's living room, looking me in the eye and rewriting history to support her narrative, but I forced myself to play along. I haven't been confused, I said quietly. Maybe a little lonely since retiring, but not confused. Melanie's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of satisfaction crossing her features. Eleanor, honey, that's exactly what I mean. The inability to recognize the changes in yourself. It's one of the early signs. Signs of what? Dementia, Eleanor, combined with what looks like substance abuse. We're looking at a very serious situation. Melanie reached across and patted my hand, the gesture making my skin crawl. But the good news is, we caught it early. There are facilities that specialize in this kind of dual diagnosis. I stared at her, watching her construct my imprisonment with the same casual tone someone might use to discuss vacation plans. Facilities, specialized care centers where you can get the help you need. William's already been researching options. There's a lovely place in Riverside, very discreet. Excellent reputation for handling cases like yours. Cases like mine, I repeated, making sure the recording device caught every word. Elderly substance abuse, complicated by cognitive decline. Melanie settled back in her chair, relaxing now that she thought I was accepting her narrative. It's more common than people think. The isolation of retirement, the loss of purpose. It drives some people to seek comfort in drugs. I felt my hands clench involuntarily and forced them to relax. Melanie, I've never used drugs in my life. Someone planted that cocaine in my bag. Her laugh was gentle, practiced the kind mental health professionals probably used with delusional patients. Eleanor, that's the addiction talking, the paranoia, the elaborate conspiracy theories. It's all part of the disease. What if it wasn't paranoia? I asked. What if someone really did plant drugs in my bag? Melanie's expression didn't change, but I caught something in her eyes, a calculation, a moment of considering how far to push this conversation. Eleanor, who would do such a thing, and why? You're a retired judge living alone. No enemies. No one who would benefit from hurting you. She tilted her head, the picture of confused concern. Unless you think William or I would do something so horrible. There it was, the challenge, the invitation to make an accusation she could dismiss as the delusion of a sick mind. I don't know who would do it, I said carefully. But I know I didn't put drugs in my own purse. Of course you didn't, Melanie agreed quickly. Not consciously. But Eleanor, addiction makes people do things they don't remember, things that seem impossible to them later. She was good, very good. Every response was designed to make me sound increasingly unstable while positioning herself as the voice of reason. The important thing now is getting you help, Melanie continued. William's meeting with the admissions coordinator at the Riverside facility this afternoon. They have an opening next week. My blood went cold. Next week. We can't wait any longer. Eleanor, the drug charge, the erratic behavior, the paranoid delusions about being framed. You're spiraling, and we love you too much to watch you destroy yourself. I looked around the living room, seeing it now as Melanie must have seen it during her planning. The photographs of William and me had been moved to less prominent positions. The furniture had been rearranged subtly, making the space feel less welcoming to visitors. Even here, in my son's home, she'd been preparing for my absence. What does William think about all this? I asked. Melanie's smile was triumphant. William is heartbroken, but he agrees it's necessary. He said just this morning that he should have listened to me months ago when I first expressed concerns about your mental state. You've been expressing concerns about my mental state for months. Of course, the missed appointments, the repeated phone calls asking the same questions, the way you'd tell the same stories over and over. Melanie was warming to her performance now, probably believing her own lies. I kept detailed notes, Eleanor, documentation of every incident. You kept notes about me. Someone had to. William loves you too much to see what was happening, but I could see the signs clearly. She leaned forward again, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Between you and me, Eleanor, I think it started even before Richard died. The stress of his illness, watching him deteriorate, it probably triggered your own cognitive decline. The mention of my late husband's name in this context felt like a physical slap. Melanie was not just destroying my present, she was rewriting my past, turning my grief into evidence of mental illness. You seem to have thought about this a lot, I said, working to keep my voice steady. I had to. Someone needed to protect William from the difficult decisions ahead. Melanie's mask slipped just slightly, revealing something cold underneath. He's too soft-hearted to make the tough choices about your care. That's why he needs me. There it was, the confession I needed, wrapped in language that sounded caring, but revealed the true nature of her plan. So, you're protecting William from me, I said. I'm protecting William from the burden of having to commit his own mother to an institution. By the time the drug charges are resolved, you'll already be getting treatment. It'll be easier for everyone this way. I sat in silence for a moment, letting her words sink in. Melanie had planned everything: the drugs, the medical consultations, the documentation of my supposed decline, even my son's emotional reaction. She'd orchestrated a complete destruction of my life while positioning herself as the caring family member making difficult decisions. Melanie, I said finally, can I ask you something? Of course. How long have you been planning this? Her smile faltered for just a moment. Planning what? This conversation, the facility in Riverside, the notes about my behavior. How long? Melanie was quiet for several seconds, studying my face. When she spoke again, her voice had changed subtly, becoming harder. Eleanor, I think you should go home now. You're getting agitated, and that's not good for someone in your condition. But I wasn't done. Not yet. One more question? I said, reaching into my purse as if looking for my keys. That little prank at the airport, the one you mentioned, what exactly did you think was funny about getting your mother-in-law arrested for drug possession? Melanie went very still. For the first time since I'd known her, her carefully constructed mask completely fell away, revealing the calculating predator underneath. I think, she said slowly, you should leave now. I walked out of William's house with Melanie's words echoing in my ears, but for the first time in weeks, I felt something approaching peace. The recording device had captured everything: her detailed planning, her manipulation of William, her casual admission of documenting false evidence against me. Most importantly, it had captured the moment when her mask slipped completely. Olivia was waiting in the van, headphones still on, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and disgust. Eleanor, that was incredible. She laid out her entire plan. Michael looked up from his legal pad where he'd been transcribing key moments. The institutionalization scheduled for next week. The documented evidence of mental decline. The way she's been manipulating William. This is enough to destroy her credibility completely. What happens now? I asked, settling into the passenger seat and finally allowing myself to feel the emotional exhaustion of the past hour. Now we move fast, Olivia said, starting the engine. Melanie knows something's wrong. The way you questioned her at the end, she's going to realize you were more coherent than someone with dementia should be. She'll either run or escalate. As if summoned by her words, my phone rang. William's name appeared on the screen. Answer it, Michael said. Act normal. We need to know what Melanie's telling him. I accepted the call, putting it on speaker. Hi, William? Mom. His voice was strained, worried. Melanie called me. She's very concerned about your visit today. She said you seemed confused, paranoid. You accused her of planting drugs in your bag. My heart broke a little more. Even now, even after everything I'd learned, William believed his wife over his mother. William, I need to see you alone. There are things you need to know about Melanie. Mom, please. William's voice cracked slightly. Melanie's trying to help. We both are. This paranoia, these conspiracy theories, they're exactly what the doctor said we should expect. What doctors? The specialists Melanie consulted about your condition? Mom, I know this is hard to accept, but you're sick. The drugs, the memory problems, the confusion about reality. We can't pretend anymore that you're okay. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of Melanie's manipulation. She'd poisoned my son so thoroughly against me that even direct confrontation wouldn't work. He'd been conditioned to interpret any resistance as evidence of my mental illness. William, just meet with me once. One conversation, then I'll accept whatever decision you make about my care. There was a long pause. Mom, I can't keep doing this. Every time we try to help you, you come up with new conspiracy theories. Melanie's been nothing but supportive, and you're treating her like she's some kind of villain. Please, I said, hating the desperation in my voice. 1 hour? If after that you still think I need institutional care, I'll go voluntarily. Another pause. Longer this time. Fine, 1 hour. But Melanie comes too. I won't have you making more accusations against my wife without her there to defend herself. After I hung up, Olivia shook her head. He's completely under her control, Eleanor. Are you prepared for the possibility that even with this recording, William might choose to believe Melanie? I thought about my son, about the boy who used to come to me with scraped knees and broken toys, trusting that I could fix anything. The young man who'd once told me my approval meant more to him than anyone else's. Somewhere along the way, Melanie had convinced him that I was the broken thing that needed fixing. I have to try, I said. If I don't, she wins completely. But as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. Melanie hadn't just gone after my freedom or my reputation. She'd gone after the one thing I valued most, my relationship with my son. 23 years as a judge had taught me that justice isn't just about evidence and testimony. It's about truth, cutting through deception. It's about right prevailing over wrong. And sometimes, it's about having the courage to face the most painful truths of all. Melanie Wright Barnes had no idea who she was dealing with, but she was about to find out. Because no one threatens a mother's relationship with her child and gets away with it. Not even the most skilled manipulator. And especially not when that mother spent over 2 decades being called the Steel Judge. We met at Franklin's, a small coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse where I'd spent most of my career. I arrived early, needing time to gather my thoughts and prepare for what might be the most important conversation of my life. Michael and Olivia had coached me for hours on how to present the evidence, how to keep my emotions in check, how to anticipate Melanie's counter moves. Remember, Olivia had said, Melanie will try to make you look unstable. She'll interrupt, twist your words, possibly even provoke you into an outburst. Don't take the bait. I chose a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. The familiar aroma of coffee and pastries reminded me of countless early mornings reviewing case files before court. Those had been simpler days, when right and wrong seemed clearer, when the villain sat across the courtroom rather than across the dinner table. William arrived first, 10 minutes early. My heart ached at the sight of him, dark circles under his eyes. His normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. His campaign for city council had been going well until this crisis. He was always meticulous about his image, a trait he'd inherited from me. The fact that he hadn't bothered to straighten his tie spoke volumes about his state of mind. "Mom," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. His voice was formal, distant. Gone was the warmth I'd once taken for granted. "William." I resisted the urge to reach for his hand. "Thank you for coming." "Let's just get this over with." He checked his watch. "Melanie's parking the car. She'll be here in a minute." I needed to establish connection before she arrived. "How's the Morrison case going?" I asked, referring to a high-profile lawsuit he'd been handling. Surprise flickered across his face, followed by suspicion. "Fine. Why?" "I saw the motion you filed last week." The precedent from Haverford v. State was clever. His expression softened slightly. "You're following my cases." "Of course I am. You're an excellent attorney, William." Before he could respond, the door opened and Melanie walked in. She was perfectly put together, as always, cream-colored blazer, designer shoes, hair styled in soft waves, the picture of a supportive political wife. but I knew what lurked beneath that carefully cultivated image. Eleanor, she said, her voice carrying just the right note of concern as she slid into the seat beside William. I'm glad we're doing this. We all want what's best for you. William squeezed her hand. The gesture sent a pang through my chest. Before we start, I said, I'd like to play something for you both. I placed my phone on the table and pressed play on the recording from yesterday. Melanie's voice filled the space between us. Elderly substance abuse complicated by cognitive decline. It's more common than people think. The isolation of retirement, the loss of purpose, it drives some people to seek comfort in drugs. William frowned, looking between Melanie and me. What is this? I fast-forwarded to the most damning section. Melanie's voice continued. William's meeting with the admissions coordinator at the Riverside facility this afternoon. They have an opening next week. You already scheduled my institutionalization, I asked William quietly. Without talking to me about it, William's face had gone pale. Mom, Melanie said it was just exploratory, getting information about options. I played another section. I kept detailed notes. Eleanor, documentation of every incident. What notes? William asked, turning to his wife. Melanie, what is she talking about? Melanie's carefully constructed composure was beginning to crack. William, she's obviously doctored this recording somehow. People with dementia can become very paranoid, very manipulative. But I wasn't finished. I played the final section where Melanie's mask had completely fallen away. I'm protecting William from the burden of having to commit his own mother to an institution. By the time the drug charges are resolved, you'll already be getting treatment. It'll be easier for everyone this way. The silence that followed was deafening. William stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. Melanie, he said slowly, you told me the facility was just a backup plan, something to consider if Mom's condition got worse. It is, Melanie said quickly, but her voice had lost its steady confidence. William, she's manipulating you. This recording is taken out of context. What context? I asked. What context makes it acceptable to schedule someone's institutionalization without their knowledge? Melanie turned to me, and for a moment, I saw pure hatred in her eyes. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed. William needs structure. Needs someone to make difficult decisions for him. You're weak. You're old. You're useless to him now. The words hit William like a physical blow. Melanie, what are you saying? But Melanie was beyond caring about maintaining her facade. Years of careful manipulation were unraveling, and she was losing control completely. I'm saying your mother is a pathetic old woman who's outlived her usefulness, she snapped. She's taking up space, taking attention away from our marriage, from our future. Someone had to deal with the problem. William stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The problem? You're talking about my mother like she's garbage to be disposed of. That's exactly what she is, Melanie shot back. And if you can't see that, then you're as weak and stupid as I thought. The coffee shop had gone quiet, other customers turning to stare at our table. William looked at his wife as if really seeing her, truly seeing her. You planted drugs in my mother's bag, he said, the words coming out like he was testing their weight. You planned to have her arrested, discredited, locked away. I did what needed to be done, Melanie said defiantly. Someone had to protect our interests. Our interests, William's voice was rising. You framed my mother for drug possession to protect our interests. I watched my son process the full scope of his wife's betrayal, saw the moment when everything clicked into place, the gradual isolation from me, the subtle undermining of my credibility, the careful documentation of fabricated evidence. How long, he asked quietly, How long have you been planning this? Melanie seemed to realize that her outburst had destroyed any chance of salvaging her position. She gathered her purse and stood, her expression shifting from rage to cold calculation. I want a divorce, she said flatly. And I want half of everything, including the house. William stared at her. After what you've just admitted to, you think you're entitled to anything. I think, Melanie said, her voice regaining some of its earlier steadiness, that you'll find it very difficult to prove anything. It's my word against a recording that could easily have been manipulated by a woman with obvious mental health issues. She was right, and we all knew it. Even with the recording, a good lawyer could cast doubt on its authenticity, could argue that I'd edited it selectively, could point to my arrest as evidence of instability. But Melanie had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that her previous victims had been too intimidated to fight back, too isolated to find allies, too broken to seek justice. She didn't know that Detective Olivia Rodriguez had been listening to every word through the wire I was still wearing. Actually, Melanie, I said quietly, I think you'll find that proving things is exactly what I'm good at. The coffee shop door opened and Olivia walked in, badge visible, with two uniformed officers behind her. Melanie Wright Barnes? Olivia said, her voice carrying the authority of law. You're under arrest for evidence tampering, fraud, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Melanie's face drained of color as the officers approached. This is ridiculous. You can't. We can and we are, Olivia said, nodding to the officers. We have a warrant for your arrest based on evidence of your purchase of pharmaceutical-grade cocaine from Hillcrest Supply, security footage from LAX, and your own recorded confession. As they read Melanie her rights and placed handcuffs on her wrists, she locked eyes with me. This isn't over, she said, her voice low and venomous. You have no idea what I'm capable of. I held her gaze steadily. Actually, I think I do. After they led Melanie away, William collapsed back into his chair, looking shell-shocked. The coffee shop slowly returned to its normal buzz of conversation, though I could feel curious glances being cast our way. Mom, William said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand. How did this happen? How did I not see it? I reached across the table and took his hand. This time, he didn't pull away. She was very good at what she did. William, very careful, very patient. But the things she said about you, the story about your memory problems, your confusion, I believed her. Why would I believe those things about my own mother? The pain in his voice broke my heart, because she built her lies on small truths. Yes, I've been more isolated since retirement. Yes, I sometimes repeat stories or forget small details. Everyone does at my age. She took those normal things and wove them into something sinister. William shook his head. I should have known better. I'm a lawyer, for God's sake. I cross-examine witnesses for a living. How could I be so completely taken in? Because you loved her, I said simply. And love makes us want to believe the best in people, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. He looked up, his eyes filled with remorse. What happens now with the drug charges against you? They'll be dropped. Olivia has enough evidence to prove Melanie planted them. And Melanie. She'll face serious charges, evidence tampering, filing false reports, conspiracy. William nodded, then looked down at his wedding ring. I keep thinking about what she said, that I'm weak, that I needed her to make decisions for me. He twisted the gold band off his finger and placed it on the table. Maybe she was right about that part. William Barnes, I said, using the tone that had once made attorneys straighten in my courtroom, you are not weak. You're one of the strongest people I know. Melanie didn't prey on you because you're weak. She chose you because you're kind and trusting. Those are virtues, not failings. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You sound like a judge again. Once a judge, always a judge, I said, returning his smile. Some habits are hard to break. The next few days passed in a blur of police statements, legal consultations, and press inquiries. William's political opponents were already trying to use the scandal against him, suggesting he showed poor judgment in his personal life. How could voters trust him with city business if he couldn't see what was happening in his own home? I was in my apartment, sorting through the day's mail, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find William standing there, holding a small duffel bag. Can I stay here for a few days? He asked. The house, I can't be there right now. Too many memories. Of course, I said, stepping aside to let him in. You don't even have to ask. He set his bag down and looked around the modest apartment where I'd lived since selling the family home after his father died. It's strange, he said. I've only been here a handful of times, but it feels more like home than my own house right now. That's because it is your home, William. It always has been. He wandered into the living room, stopping before the bookshelf where I kept family photos. He picked up one of him at his law school graduation, standing between me and his father. We were all beaming with pride. I miss Dad, he said softly. He would have seen through her right away. Maybe, I said, joining him. But Richard could be taken in too. He once loaned money to that contractor who disappeared halfway through renovating our kitchen. Remember? William laughed, a sound I hadn't heard in too long. I'd forgotten about that. Mom, there's something I need to ask you. I recognized his serious tone. Go ahead. The recording. What Melanie said about me needing someone to make difficult decisions. Was she right? Have I always been that way? I considered his question carefully. This wasn't the time for comforting lies. You've always been thoughtful. William, cautious. You like to consider all angles before making a decision. And that's what makes you a good attorney. It's not the same as being weak or indecisive. But I let her isolate you. I let her convince me you were losing your mind. What kind of son does that? A human one. I said. William, I wasn't the perfect mother. I was demanding, sometimes harsh. After your father died, I put too much pressure on you to succeed. It would be natural for you to harbor some resentment, even unconsciously. He shook his head. That's no excuse. It's not an excuse. It's context. Melanie exploited the complicated relationship we already had. She didn't create it from nothing. William set the photo back on the shelf. How do we fix this? Us, I mean. We start by being honest with each other, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. He nodded slowly. I can do that. Then he added, with the hint of a smile, Your Honor. The next morning, I woke to find William already up, making coffee in my small kitchen. I hope I didn't wake you, he said, handing me a steaming mug. I couldn't sleep. Been thinking about what you said last night, about being honest. I took the coffee gratefully. And I think you're right. We need to talk about things we've both avoided for years. He sat across from me at the breakfast table, starting with Dad's death. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest at the mention of Richard. Even after 10 years, the loss could still catch me off guard. What about it? I asked carefully. I was angry at you afterward, William said, the words coming out in a rush. Not for his death, that wasn't your fault, but for how quickly you seemed to move on. 2 weeks after the funeral, you were back at work, full schedule, like nothing had happened. I stared into my coffee, remembering those dark days. I didn't move on, William. Work was the only thing keeping me from falling apart completely. I know that now, but then it felt like you were just continuing. While I was drowning, I should have seen how much you were hurting. Should have been there for you more. William shook his head. That's not what I'm saying. I don't want you to apologize. I just want you to understand why it might have been easy for Melanie to come between us. There were cracks already there, unspoken things. And now we're speaking them, I said. Better late than never. He offered a small smile. Much better. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. William went to answer it while I refilled our coffee mugs. He returned a moment later with Michael and Olivia, both looking more serious than usual. Eleanor, Olivia said without preamble, we have a problem. Melanie made bail this morning. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. How I thought the judge set it at $500,000? She had help, Michael said grimly. That's what we came to tell you. Melanie isn't working alone. She's part of a network, people who systematically target wealthy, elderly individuals, isolate them from their families, and take control of their assets. William paled. A network? You mean there are more people like her out there? Olivia nodded. We've been tracking this group for almost 2 years. They call themselves the caretakers. Very organized, very careful. Melanie is the first one we've been able to arrest with substantial evidence. And now she's out, I said, understanding the implications. With very powerful friends who won't be happy that she's been exposed. Olivia confirmed. We have reason to believe they might try to silence her or anyone who could testify against her. William straightened, his lawyer instincts kicking in. You're saying my mother is in danger. Both of you could be, Michael said. William, you're a material witness now. If Melanie goes down, she could implicate others in the network. They won't want that. What do we do? I asked, feeling the weight of this new threat settling on my shoulders. Olivia's expression was determined. We fight back. But first, we need to get you both somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look. I have a cabin, Michael offered. In the mountains, about 3 hours from here. Very private, hard to find unless you know where to look. William looked at me, concern in his eyes. Mom, 24 hours ago, I'd been fighting to prove my sanity and keep my freedom. Now I was potentially running for my life from a criminal organization I'd never heard of until today. But one thing remained unchanged. I would do whatever it took to protect my son. When do we leave? I asked. Now, Olivia said. Pack only what you absolutely need. We can't risk going back to William's house. They'll be watching it. As I hurried to throw some clothes into a bag, I couldn't help but think how quickly life could change. One moment, you're a respected judge, secure in your identity and place in the world. The next, you're a fugitive from people who want to destroy you. But if Melanie and her associates thought I would be an easy target, a frightened old woman running scared, they were about to learn the same lesson Melanie had already begun to understand. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Michael's cabin was exactly what we needed: remote, rustic, and nestled among towering pines that shielded it from view. After the 3-hour drive along winding mountain roads, we arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the clearing. It's not much, Michael said, unlocking the heavy wooden door. But it's secure. No one knows about this place except my sister, and she's in Europe for the next month. The interior was surprisingly comfortable: stone fireplace, solid furniture, well-stocked kitchen. Not at all the bare-bones hunting cabin I'd expected. This is beautiful, I said, taking in the large windows overlooking the forest. Michael smiled, a hint of shyness in his expression. I come up here to write. Been working on a legal thriller for years. Probably never finish it. I didn't know you wrote, I said, realizing how little I knew about his life outside the courthouse. There's a lot we don't know about each other, he replied, our eyes meeting briefly before he turned away. I'll get the bags. William was exploring the space, examining the bookshelves packed with legal texts and mystery novels. "How long do we need to stay here?" he asked Olivia. "Just until the preliminary hearing," she said. "3 days, maybe 4. We need Melanie formally charged and the evidence secured. After that, the risk drops significantly." "And what about this network, the caretakers?" I asked. "Won't they still be a threat?" Olivia's expression was grim. "Yes, but we're making progress. Melanie's arrest has created cracks in their operation. People are talking, looking to make deals." Michael returned with our bags. "There are 2 bedrooms upstairs. Eleanor, you can take the master. William, there's a smaller room with a twin bed. I'll sleep on the couch down here." "I couldn't put you out of your bed," I protested. "It's no trouble," he said with the same gentle smile I remembered from our days working together. "Besides, I'll be on first watch." "First watch," William raised an eyebrow. "Just a precaution," Olivia assured him. "I'll take the second shift. We don't anticipate any problems, but it's better to be safe." As we settled in for the night, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Fear, certainly, but also a peculiar sense of relief. For the first time in years, the truth was out in the open. No more pretending, no more careful navigation of Melanie's traps. Whatever danger we faced now, at least we faced it together. I unpacked my small bag in the master bedroom, placing my toothbrush in the ensuite bathroom and hanging my few clothes in the cedar closet. On the bedside table sat a framed photograph, a younger Michael in hiking gear, standing on a mountain summit, grinning into the camera. He looked happy, carefree. I wondered when he'd last felt that way. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called. William entered, looking uncertain. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course." I patted the edge of the bed, and he sat beside me, just as he used to do when he was a boy with a problem too big for his young shoulders. "I've been thinking about what Melanie said at the coffee shop," he began. "About me being weak, needing someone to make decisions for me." "William," he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. There might be some truth to it. Not the way she meant it, but I've always sought approval. From you, from Dad, from my professors, from partners at the firm. I've built my life around what other people think of me." "That's not weakness," I said. "That's being conscientious." "It's more than that. When Melanie came into my life, she seemed so certain about everything. She knew exactly what she wanted, exactly how things should be. It was intoxicating. I guess I didn't have to wonder if I was making the right choices because she made them for me." I considered his words carefully, and that felt like freedom. "Yes." He looked surprised at my understanding. "Exactly. But it wasn't freedom. It was just another kind of prison. One you built yourself," I said gently. "With her help." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The worst part is, I think I knew something was wrong. There were moments when I'd catch her in a contradiction, or she'd say something that didn't quite make sense. But I'd push those thoughts away because facing them meant facing the possibility that I'd made a terrible mistake. We all do that. William, all of us. Even you, the steel judge." There was no mockery in his voice, just genuine curiosity. "Especially me." I took his hand. "You know why I retired when I did. You said you were ready, that 62 was a good age to step down. That wasn't the whole truth." I took a deep breath. "My last case was a domestic violence petition. A young woman named Laura Simmons was seeking protection from her husband. I granted a temporary restraining order, but I didn't make it permanent. There wasn't enough evidence," I said. 3 weeks later, her husband killed her." William's eyes widened. "Mom, I had no idea." I kept it quiet, but afterward, reviewing the case files, I realized I'd missed signs, things she'd said that I'd dismissed. I was so focused on legal standards of evidence that I didn't see the human truth right in front of me. That's why you left the bench. I nodded. I couldn't trust my judgment anymore. So, you see, we all have blind spots, especially when it comes to seeing what we don't want to see. William was quiet for a long moment. How do you live with a mistake like that, one day at a time? I said. And by trying to do better, that's all any of us can do. He leaned over and hugged me, something he hadn't done in years. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I know, I whispered, holding him close. Me too. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Downstairs, I found Michael at the stove, expertly flipping pancakes while William set the table. Look who decided to join us, Michael said with a warm smile. Sleep well. Better than I have in months, I admitted, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. Where's Olivia? Making calls outside, William said. Signal's better on the east side of the property. As if on cue, the door opened and Olivia entered, her expression serious but not alarmed. Good news and bad news, she announced, helping herself to coffee. The good news is we have a court date for Melanie's preliminary hearing day after tomorrow. Judge Harrison is presiding. Evelyn Harrison, I asked. We served on the bench together for years. She's tough but fair. That's the good news, Olivia agreed. The bad news is that Melanie's lawyer is filing a motion to dismiss all charges, claiming the recording was obtained illegally and that you orchestrated this whole thing as revenge for her trying to help you with your addiction. William nearly choked on his coffee. That's absurd. It's smart, I corrected him. She's flipping the narrative, making herself the victim and me the unstable aggressor. It's exactly what I would have advised if I were her attorney. There's more, Olivia said. We've identified at least 3 other members of the caretakers operating in Southern California. One of them is a man named James Fletcher. Michael froze in the act of serving pancakes. James Fletcher. The estate attorney, Olivia nodded. The same. He specializes in elder law, conservatorships, power of attorney, perfect position to identify and target wealthy seniors. He was at our house for dinner last month, William said, the color draining from his face. Melanie invited him. Said he was an old family friend who could help with estate planning. He was assessing me, I realized, determining if I'd be an easy target. Exactly, Olivia confirmed. Fletcher is the legal arm of the operation. He creates the paperwork that makes everything look legitimate. What about the others? Michael asked. A geriatric nurse named Patricia Dawson, who works at 3 different assisted living facilities, and a financial advisor, Robert Campbell, who manages family trusts for their victims. The scale of the operation was staggering. This wasn't just Melanie acting alone. This was an organized criminal enterprise preying on vulnerable seniors, and they'd almost added me to their list of victims. There's one more thing, Olivia said, her voice softening. We found Gregory Wilson. Melanie's second husband, I asked, the one who disappeared. Yes, he's living in Montana under the name Gregory Miller. I spoke with him this morning. He's willing to testify about what Melanie did to him. William set down his fork. What exactly did she do? Olivia hesitated. It's similar to what she tried with your mother. She isolated him from friends and family, convinced everyone he was unstable, planted drugs in his car, and called in an anonymous tip. By the time the charges were dropped, he'd lost his job, his reputation, everything. And Thomas Reynolds, her first husband, I asked, dreading the answer. That's more complicated, Olivia said. The suicide still looks genuine, but there are questions about whether she may have tampered with his medication, contributed to his depression. His sister Claire is coming forward with new information. The table fell silent as we all absorbed the magnitude of what we were dealing with. Melanie wasn't just a manipulative person, she was potentially a killer. "What do we do now?" William finally asked. "We prepare for court," Michael said firmly. "We gather our evidence, line up our witnesses, and make sure this case is airtight. The preliminary hearing is just the beginning. There will be a full trial after that." "And in the meantime," I asked. "In the meantime," Olivia said, "we keep you both safe and work on dismantling the caretakers piece by piece." Destes. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived with a clarity that only comes in the mountains. The sky was a perfect blue, the air crisp and clean. It felt like a good omen. We drove back to the city in 2 cars, Olivia and William in one, Michael and me in the other. The ride gave Michael and me a chance to talk without interruption, something we hadn't done in years. "You know," he said as we wound down the mountain roads, "I always admired you on the bench, your clarity, your sense of purpose." "That's kind of you to say." "It's the truth." He glanced at me before returning his eyes to the road. "But I worried about you after Richard died. You threw yourself into work so completely. It was like you were trying to outrun your grief." "Maybe I was," I admitted. Work was the one place where things made sense, where there were rules and procedures and right answers. And now, without the courtroom. I looked out at the passing landscape, considering his question. Now I'm learning that life is messier than a legal proceeding, that justice isn't always served with a gavel. Sometimes it comes in unexpected ways, like exposing your daughter-in-law as part of a criminal enterprise. There was a hint of humor in his voice. "Exactly like that." I smiled, then grew serious again. "Michael, thank you for everything you've done these past days. You don't need to thank me, Eleanor." "Yes, I do. You dropped everything to help me, risked your safety, opened your home. Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, his hands steady on the wheel. "Because it's you," he said finally. "It's always been you." The simple words hung in the air between us, full of meaning I wasn't quite ready to examine, but they warmed something inside me that had been cold for a very long time. The courthouse hadn't changed much since my days on the bench. Same imposing columns, same marble floors, same sense of gravity that came with the pursuit of justice. But entering as a witness rather than a judge felt strange, almost disorienting. Olivia met us at the side entrance, away from the reporters who had gathered at the front steps. The case had attracted significant media attention, former judge accused of drug possession, prominent attorney's wife arrested for framing her mother-in-law. It had all the elements of a sensational story. "Ready?" Olivia asked as we approached the courtroom. "As I'll ever be," I replied. Inside, the courtroom was nearly full. William was already seated in the front row. He'd arrived earlier with his own attorney, a necessary precaution given his position as both witness and victim. Across the aisle sat a team of lawyers I didn't recognize. Melanie's defense team, I presumed. And then I saw her. Melanie sat beside her attorneys, dressed conservatively in a navy suit, her hair pulled back in a modest bun. Gone was the stylish, confident woman who had threatened me in my son's living room. In her place was a meek, frightened-looking defendant, the perfect picture of innocence. Our eyes met across the room, and for a brief moment, her mask slipped. The hatred in her gaze was palpable, a living thing that seemed to bridge the distance between us. Then her attorney whispered something in her ear, and the vulnerable facade returned. "All rise," called the bailiff. "The Honorable Judge Evelyn Harrison presiding." Judge Harrison entered, her robes flowing behind her as she took her place at the bench. At 68, she was one of the most respected judges in the county, known for her no-nonsense approach and keen intellect. "Be seated," she said, adjusting her glasses as she reviewed the file before her. We are here for the preliminary hearing in the case of State versus Melanie Wright Barnes. Charges include evidence tampering, conspiracy to commit false imprisonment, and fraud. How does the defendant plead? Melanie's lead attorney, a silver-haired man with an expensive suit and practiced smile, stood, "Not guilty, Your Honor," and we moved to dismiss all charges based on lack of evidence and improper investigative procedures. Your motion is noted. Mr. Harrington will address it after opening statements. Judge Harrison turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Martinez, you may proceed. The prosecutor, a sharp-looking woman in her 40s whom I vaguely recognized from my days on the bench, approached the podium. Your Honor, the state will show that the defendant, Melanie Wright Barnes, engaged in a calculated scheme to discredit and institutionalize her mother-in-law, Eleanor Barnes, a respected former judge of this court. The evidence will demonstrate that Ms. Wright Barnes purchased pharmaceutical-grade cocaine, planted it in Mrs. Barnes's purse at LAX airport, and then systematically worked to convince Mrs. Barnes's son and medical providers that she was suffering from dementia and substance abuse issues. Melanie's attorney was on his feet immediately. Objection! Your Honor, counsel is presenting speculation as fact. This is an opening statement. Mr. Harrington. Judge Harrison replied coolly. Ms. Martinez is outlining what the state intends to prove. Overruled. Continue, Counselor. Thank you, Your Honor. The state will further show that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of similar behavior by the defendant against previous spouses, and potentially connected to a larger criminal enterprise targeting elderly individuals with substantial assets. I watched Judge Harrison's expression carefully. She betrayed no emotion, but I knew her well enough to recognize the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated she was taking this very seriously. Melanie's attorney approached the podium next, his voice smooth and reasonable. Your Honor, what we have here is a sad but unfortunately common family dispute that has been criminalized unnecessarily. Mrs. Barnes, a retired judge who has struggled with the transition to private life, became paranoid and began making accusations against my client, who was only trying to help her husband manage his mother's declining health. I felt a surge of anger at his characterization, but kept my expression neutral. This was exactly the narrative we'd expected. The so-called evidence against my client consists primarily of a recording obtained without consent and taken out of context, purchase of a legal substance for legitimate dental use, and testimony from a disgruntled ex-spouse. None of this rises to the level of criminal conduct. Judge Harrison listened impassively. Thank you, Mr. Harrington. The court will now hear testimony from the state's first witness. The state calls Eleanor Barnes, announced Ms. Martinez. As I made my way to the witness stand, I caught William's eye. He gave me a small, encouraging nod. I took the oath and settled into the chair, facing the courtroom where I'd once presided. Mrs. Barnes, Miss Martinez began, please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant prior to the incident at LAX airport. Drawing a deep breath, I began my testimony, recounting 3 years of subtle manipulation and isolation. As I spoke, I noticed several jurors leaning forward, their expressions growing increasingly concerned. Even Judge Harrison, who rarely showed emotion during proceedings, seemed disturbed by my account. When Miss Martinez played the recording of my conversation with Melanie, a murmur ran through the courtroom. Melanie's own words, I'm protecting William from the burden of having to commit his own mother to an institution, echoed through the space, damning in their clarity. Throughout my testimony, I kept my voice steady, my responses measured. This wasn't about emotion or revenge. It was about truth and justice principles I'd upheld my entire career. Mr. Harrington's cross-examination was aggressive, as expected. He questioned my memory, my mental state, my motivations. He suggested I had engineered the entire situation out of resentment toward my daughter-in-law. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Barnes," he asked with exaggerated concern, "that you've had difficulty adjusting to retirement, that you felt increasingly irrelevant and sought to regain control over your son's life?" "No," I replied calmly. "That is not true." "And isn't it also true that you resented my client's influence over your son, that you saw her as a threat to your relationship with him?" I was concerned about the way she isolated him from me and others who cared about him. "That's not resentment, that's a mother's natural concern." "A mother's concern," he repeated, his tone skeptical. "Or a controlling parent unwilling to let go." Before I could respond, Judge Harrison interrupted. "Mr. Harrington, please confine your questions to relevant matters. The court is not interested in your editorializing." "My apologies, Your Honor." But his smug expression suggested he'd achieved his goal, planting seeds of doubt about my motivations. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. I'd done what I could. Now it was up to the others, William, Olivia, Gregory Wilson, Dr. Phillips, to complete the picture. The preliminary hearing continued through the afternoon, each witness adding another piece to the puzzle. William's testimony was particularly powerful, describing how Melanie had gradually changed his perception of me, reinterpreting normal behavior as signs of decline. But the most damning testimony came from Gregory Wilson, who described in chilling detail how Melanie had used almost identical tactics against him, culminating in his near destruction. When asked why he'd never pressed charges, his answer was simple and devastating. "Because by the time I realized what had happened, I had lost everything: my job, my home, my reputation. Who would have believed me? I was just grateful to escape with my life." By the end of the day, Judge Harrison had heard enough to make her ruling. "Based on the evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to bind the defendant over for trial on all charges. Bail is revoked pending trial due to new evidence suggesting the defendant poses a flight risk and potential danger to witnesses." As the bailiff led Melanie away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one last time. There was no pretense now, no mask of concern or vulnerability, just cold, calculating hatred and something else: fear. For perhaps the first time, Melanie Wright Barnes was afraid. Outside the courthouse, William, Michael, Olivia and I stood together in the fading afternoon light. The first battle had been won, but the war was far from over. There would be a trial, more testimony, more attempts to twist the truth. But for now, in this moment, justice had prevailed, and that was enough. "What happens now?" William asked, loosening his tie. "Now," I said, "we go home together." As we walked down the courthouse steps, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them as a family, stronger, wiser, and more united than before. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remind us of what truly matters. In my case, it took a criminal daughter-in-law with a penchant for manipulation. Not the path I would have chosen, but I was grateful for where it had led me. Back to my son, back to myself, and perhaps towards something new with Michael, whose steady presence beside me felt increasingly like a promise of things to come. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and don't forget to check out 2 other stories that are channel favorites: The Inheritance Trap and When My Grandson Called Me by a Different Name.